outspoken Maverick, teacher of Obi-Wan Kenobi, keeper of the wills, and finder of the chosen one. How powerful was Qui-Gon Jinn? Like many who made up his master-apprentice lineage, Qui-Gon Jinn was a human male. Taxonomically referred to as Homo sapiens, humans were the most common species in the galaxy and were often considered the standard by which the biology, physiology, and culture of other races were compared. Though their attributes often varied from person to person, humans were specifically noted for their hardiness and adaptability. As noted by the Jedi vs. Sith: The Essential Guide to the Force and the Major Characters' Birth Years post on StarWarsBlogs.com, Jinn was born in the year 92 BBY, making him exactly 60 years old at the time of his death. While the Phantom Menace novelization does specify that the Maverick was past his physical prime, various other works have made special note of his advanced physical capabilities. At 6 feet 4 inches, or 1.93 meters tall, Qui-Gon Jinn was as imposing as he was powerful. Sharp blue eyes set atop a pointed jawline gave him the appearance of someone who could look directly through you, while a thick set of hands and broad shoulders reinforced his strong, athletic build. Those latter traits in particular are especially notable, since strength is Jinn's most frequently acclaimed attribute. During the Taurus Civil War, he was able to completely shatter the blaster-resistant blade of Governor Cryon with a single swing, as well as send his former apprentice Xanatos flying with a single kick. Fast forward 23 years to TPM, and Qui-Gon was still able to match Darth Maul's strength despite the latter's comparative youth. The force behind the Maverick's punches were such that Maul could literally feel the blows shudder throughout his body with every exchange. While I do attribute this feat mainly to Jinn's physical augmentation, he would have needed an at least semi-comparable baseline physique to pull something like that off. Like most Ataru specialists, Qui-Gon also possessed exceptional levels of speed and balance, speed blitzing criminals on a fairly regular basis, and maintaining his footing on the loose Tatooine sands during his first engagement with Maul. His manual dexterity was also quite prodigious. Not only has Jinn only been disarmed once, which was in a group engagement I might add, but he was able to transition between attack and defense sequences purely by instinct. While his apprentice eventually outstripped him in regards to durability, Jinn could still take one hell of a beating before going down, tanking the physical strikes leveled against him by Xanatos and Darth Maul alike. However, Qui-Gon Jinn's physicality was not without its major shortcomings. Due to his advanced age, his agility, while still serviceable, was no longer compatible with the flamboyant nature of conventional Form 4 blade work, forcing him to adjust his lightsaber technique to accommodate. Jinn's degradation carried over to his stamina, his short bout with Maul in the hot desert leaving him visibly exhausted, and fatigue being one of, if not the major contributing factor to his death at the Sith apprentice's hands on Naboo. However, he still maintained a good level of physical ability despite his age, and was able to keep pace with the much fitter Darth Maul for about 80% of the Duel of Fates, only starting to tire towards the very end. At the end of the day, I would say that the most accurate frame of reference for Qui-Gon Jinn's physical capabilities would be the character of Darth Bane from the Darth Bane trilogy, particularly its final installment, Dynasty of Evil. Jinn may not be quite as muscular a beast as Bane, but his basic physical attributes are very similar. He was an offensive giant who is capable of overpowering all but the most formidable of combatants with consummate ease. And while definitely past his prime, his still formidable strength, coupled with his highly advanced dexterity and pain threshold, made him a powerful foe. While there is more than enough information available on Qui-Gon Jinn to dive straight into his capabilities, I will be examining the ideals that were prevalent in his era and his personal mentality regarding combat for the sake of completionism. With the Sith Order's seeming destruction and the Ruusan reformations demilitarizing the Galactic Republic for the next 1,000 years, the Jedi Order of Jinn's time could largely be considered an era of academics. At that time, the focus was on engagements with blaster-wielding assailants, not duels. Projectile defense was the prevailing training method Jedi initiates were taught, as opposed to the more militaristic training they received in days gone by. That being said, these circumstances were also something of a blessing in disguise. Since there were no more Sith to wage war against, the Jedi were also given ample time to perfect their martial arts techniques in the sparring arena, which in turn led to the development of new and innovative styles that could be used in those rare situations where blade-to-blade combat was necessary. Furthermore, while many Jedi Masters shifted their teaching methods towards dealing with shooters, there were still some amongst their ranks who were dedicated to physical combat. One of these Jedi just so happened to be Master Dooku, who was regarded as one of the finest lightsaber masters of his era and Qui-Gon's former master. Realizing the limitations of over-specialization, Dooku placed a strong emphasis on swordsmanship when training all his apprentices. This leads me to conclude that Jinn, in accordance with the canon, was a dedicated lightsaber duelist, focusing on the physical side of Jedi training. Addressing his reputation specifically, practically every source that has featured Qui-Gon Jinn has credited him amongst the Order's best. In order to keep things concise, I will be focusing my examination on what I consider to be the most poignant of the Maverick's accolades. As noted by the TPM novelization, Jinn was regarded by his 400-year-old lightsaber instructor as his finest student, and hailed as one of the most capable field agents of his era. His skills and expertise were such that even the acclaimed Jedi Battlemaster Anun Bandara labeled him the superior swordsman. This reputation even carried over into the Order of the Sith Lords. Though they never actually engaged in combat, both Darth Sidious and his master Darth Plagueis expressed wariness upon learning that Qui-Gon had been the Jedi Master Valorum had sent to Naboo, believing that Gunray and his Trade Federation allies would stand no chance against him if a battle were to unfold. Speaking of Sidious, Darth Maul mused that he had never been so greatly challenged by another Force wielder since his duel with his master on a remote world. Think about that for a second. During his training of Obi-Wan Kenobi, he engaged the powerful Dark Jedi Xanatos on several occasions, and bested him at every turn despite his former student's familiarity with the Maverick's tendencies. Qui-Gon Jinn's most well-known displays were his duels with the Sith apprentice Darth Maul in the Phantom Menace film. While he ultimately retreated during their bout on Tatooine, Jinn still acquitted himself extremely well, halting Maul's attempts to ambush him and meeting the Sith's erratic Juya offensives with apparent ease. Several days later, Jinn and Maul would face off again in the Theed plasma refinery of Naboo. During the fight, Qui-Gon was able to go toe-to-toe with Maul for a lengthy period of time, even after he had been separated from Kenobi. Though not depicted in the film, The Phantom Menace novelization depicts a scene where Maul uses the time he was trapped between the plasma barriers to bandage several burns and scars marked by chars in his clothing, indicating that the Jedi Master had indeed penetrated his defenses and scored several light cuts. Furthermore, while Jinn was ultimately killed at the tail end of the duel, it is worth noting that much of his defeat owed itself to a combination of Maul capitalizing on Qui-Gon's mounting fatigue and catching him off guard, rather than just a superior application of skill. This isn't to say that I doubt the Sith's supremacy over the Maverick, it's just that the gap between them isn't nearly as wide as some would have you believe. Moving into the more technical side of things, Jinn's lightsaber technique was a sophisticated expression of martial innovation developed and refined through decades of experience. As elaborated in the Fight Saber article, his primary technique was Ataru, the fourth form of classical lightsaber combat. Also known as the Way of the Hawkbat, Ataru was a fast-paced style that employed elaborate, flourishing swordplay reinforced by force-assisted acrobatics and physical combat techniques to outmaneuver and overpower opponents. As an Ataru master, Jinn was a momentum-based offensive fighter who reinforced lightsaber combat with integrated physical combat techniques. However, despite these adherences, his core application of the style differed sharply from conventional methods. While it has never been explicitly stated, it doesn't take much critical thinking to deduce that Jinn completely retooled Form 4, developing his own unique method. Ataru is known to lack power in its blows, yet practically every source that has described Qui-Gon Jinn's fighting style has made special note of his strength rather than his speed. This is corroborated further by the depictions of the Jedi Master's technique in the Phantom Menace film. In stark contrast to the much more energetic Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon was very grounded and strength-oriented in his moves. The reasoning behind this retooling of Ataru was twofold. The first was the limitations of the Jedi Master's physique. Jinn, as mentioned, is past his physical prime, which made the acrobatic movesets of traditional Ataru harder to pull off. As such, it follows that he would scale back the more exhaustive elements of the style in order to better accommodate his physical shortcomings, as well as shift his focus over to strength in order to take advantage of his well-developed muscle mass. The second reasoning was the influences of Dooku on his style. As noted by Lightsabers: A Guide to the Weapons of the Force, Qui-Gon incorporated much of his former master's classical fencing techniques into his technique, trading out Ataru acrobatics for Makashi-style blade manipulations and disarmaments. Equipped with a standard lightsaber with a green blade, Jinn executed his saber offense by pairing off directed strength moves with dynamic sweeping blade work, using pin-accurate power blows to pin an opponent's blade and open them up, then hacking them to pieces with a speed-based attack flurry or sweep. This dynamic swordplay was reinforced by his occasional integration of his force talents, typically telekinetic pushes and shoves to off-balance targets. In regards to defense, Qui-Gon was very minimalistic, relying on deflection parries and shunt blocks to intercept strikes, and using the kinetic energy generated by his opponents to deflect attacks he couldn't meet head-on. Further compensating for classical Ataru's shortcomings, he was an expert at blast deflection and highly effective against large groups, even multiple Jedi. Upon closer examination, I would describe the nature of Jinn's style as being something of a mashup of the disciplines employed by Count Dooku, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. What he essentially does is take Dooku's fencing-style tenets and apply them in conjunction with the linear strength-oriented focus of Anakin while transitioning between the two extremes in a manner similar to Kenobi's. This isn't to say that Qui-Gon applies these disciplines with the same level of skill as those three. He doesn't. However, this general versatility does afford his style a high degree of functionality in various combat scenarios. Based on the information available to us, as well as everything we have extrapolated, I would say that the closest approximation for Qui-Gon Jinn's raw skill as a martial artist would be that of a mid to high tier Jedi Council master, such as Ki-Adi-Mundi, Kit Fisto, and Oppo Rancisis. He was a powerful sword master with a personalized technique that was capable of undermining the vast majority of duelists without much difficulty. And though not quite as refined as the true best of the best, underestimating him would be a costly mistake. If only one thing is consistent about Qui-Gon Jinn's character, it's how much of an unorthodox thinker he is. Jinn's tactical and strategic mindset was based around a careful assessment of the immediate situation, building his responses around these precipitated evaluations. While he never took up the position of general in the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon proved his mettle as a skilled battlefield commander in the Stark Hyperspace War and the Naboo Crisis. In both instances, Jinn worked in conjunction with his allies while offering his own insight when and only when he felt it was appropriate. His strategies in single combat were similarly voluntary. Rather than rely on a tactical long view, he instead favored following his instincts and allowing the Force to guide him and direct his actions, essentially acting as a conduit for the will of the light side. He often responded to the events of battle as they came, rather than trying to anticipate his enemy's actions ahead of time. This very serene approach made Jinn dangerously unpredictable, particularly when one considers the ebb and flow nature of the Force itself. During a sparring match with Xanatos and Femur, Qui-Gon employed a very clever defensive tactic wherein he disabled each combatant as they came so he could face them one at a time rather than together. A strategy very similar to the one Dooku employed against Skywalker and Kenobi on the Invisible Hand. During a later duel with Xanatos after the latter's fall to the dark side, Jinn demonstrated his skills with psychological warfare by pointing out the Dark Jedi's sloppy footwork and goading him into an attack. While the success of this particular display owed itself greatly to Qui-Gon's intimate knowledge of his former apprentice's technique and tendencies, it's likely that he could employ more generalized applications to off-balance lesser foes. However, while assembling plans on the fly has served Jinn well in various situations, it has also proven to be one of his biggest shortcomings, and he has gotten in over his head on several occasions due to his lack of foresight. No better example exists than the Duel of Fates. As noted by the novelization, Qui-Gon was not blind to the fact that Darth Maul was basically stage managing the entire fight, guiding it to a location of his own choice. Yet he continued with his frontal assault, confident that his and Kenobi's combined force would be enough to win the day. This lack of forethought proved fatal, as rushing after Maul without a strategy in place allowed his adversary to separate Jinn from Kenobi so he could target the Maverick individually and cut him down. On the whole, I would say that Qui-Gon Jinn's tactical and strategic prowess shared the most in common with that of the Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn. He was an offensive dervish whose main area of expertise was single combat. And while by no means incapable of forward thinking, his responses were ultimately dictated by the situation at hand. A seasoned Jedi Master who was only exempt from the Council due to his personality, Qui-Gon Jinn was regarded as one of the greatest Force wielders of his era, distinguished by his advanced philosophical and academic understanding. Jinn was most closely attuned to the living Force, which was, among other things, the source from which all practical Force abilities were derived. This strong attunement enabled him to interpret the will of the Force with a degree of clarity that was largely unseen in his generation. In regards to active combat, Qui-Gon Jinn's use of the Force was heavily influenced by his supreme reverence for its power. Rather than waste his energies blindly, he only employed his powers as needed, as directed by the situation at hand. As previously stated, Jinn was capable of augmenting his physical attributes to a high degree. In addition to the feats of strength and dexterity I mentioned earlier, he dodged close-range blaster fire from a pair of destroyer droids and made it to the end of a long hallway before they could fully register they had missed. These capabilities were reinforced by his mastery of breath control, which allowed him to survive for extended periods in poisonous atmospheres or underwater by suppressing his body's natural instinct to shut down after long periods without oxygen. Qui-Gon Jinn was a gifted telekinetic, his applications ranging from broad group manipulations to subtle and inventive utility skills. He was able to summon up enough force power to incapacitate groups of soldiers, and his kinetic output was sufficient to scatter large contingents of battle droids. While not depicted in the film, the TPM novelization depicts Jinn violently dismantling a B-1 with the Force, a feat that strongly implies he is capable of disemboweling a being of flesh and blood if he so chooses. Moving into less gruesome territory, Qui-Gon was capable of using Force grips to move heavy objects with ease, as well as seize weapons from the grasps of unwilling subjects. Additionally, he proved that he can reliably penetrate the telekinetic defenses of opposing Force wielders. While the integrity of his own passive Force wall is a bit tricky to gauge, as the only time his defenses have been penetrated was before his prime and against a raging Padawan he didn't want to fight, I believe it's reasonable to assume that he would only be truly vulnerable against adepts of equal or greater strength. While Jinn has never displayed any aptitude with the more basic Force healing ability, he has employed a low-grade application of the hibernation trance to slow his vitals to avoid detection by a probe droid. Qui-Gon Jinn's strong attunement to the living Force allowed him to develop into one of the most formidable telepaths of his generation. Specific applications that he has employed include mental persuasion to implant suggestions or induce sleep, long-distance communication to share thoughts across vast distances, Force bonds to forge kinships, and the beast control ability to tame wild animals. Jinn's mental abilities were so advanced and refined that on one occasion he even successfully influenced a Hutt, a race noted for their specific immunity to telepathy and mind tricks. However, Troidarians were beyond his ability to influence. Qui-Gon is perhaps most famous for his ability to transcend the physical plane as a Force spirit, surviving his physical death and maintaining his individuality as an entity of the light side. While this power obviously has no combative applications, it speaks volumes about the strength and depth of the Maverick's connection to the life force of the universe. At the end of the day, Qui-Gon Jinn's use of the Force once again mirrors that of Ki-Adi-Mundi, Kit Fisto, and Oppo Rancisis. While a powerful lightsider, his notoriety stemmed primarily from the breadth of his skills rather than the magnitude. As a result, he was neither the quickest on the draw nor the heaviest hitter on the playing field. That being said, he remained a force to be reckoned with. While a fantastic Star Wars character with a reputation both inside and outside the franchise, Qui-Gon Jinn is most assuredly the least popular Star Wars character in his respective lineage. His time on screen is limited to one film, and his appearances in the EU, while extensive, pale in comparison to those of his masters and apprentices. However, when one takes the time to truly examine the Maverick, it becomes clear that his status as a legendary Jedi Master is well earned. Physically, he was a heavily muscled giant who, while past his prime, was still more than capable of overpowering the vast majority of other combatants and taking loads of punishment before going down. As a martial artist, Jinn was a highly skilled master of the lightsaber and a talented innovator who took the basics of the Ataru form and revamped them into a powerful fighting style that capitalized on his strengths and compensated for his weaknesses. His form may not have been the absolute antithesis of any one given fighting method, but its general versatility afforded him a wide range of functionality in various combat scenarios, and made him a challenge to even those who knew how to deal with him. As a tactician and strategist, he was a dealer with a stacked deck and nothing to lose. While he may have lacked skill in the fields of long-term planning and preparation, he knew how to follow his instincts and adjust his strategies to suit the needs of the situation at hand. With his mastery of the light side, Qui-Gon Jinn was powerful and extremely well attuned to the currents of the living force. His academic knowledge was tremendous, and his skill set, while not as flashy as others of his caliber, was still well developed and possessing of several unique characteristics that made him stand out from his peers. However, the big question we must once again answer is this: how would Qui-Gon Jinn fare in a contest with other more well-known Star Wars characters? Let's set up a combat scenario. The year is once again 19 BBY, and the Battle of Utapau is on the horizon. General Grievous is stalking through the droid hangar, preparing to face the Republic's inevitable attack on the CIS base. However, in place of Obi-Wan Kenobi, it is Qui-Gon Jinn, alive and in his Phantom Menace state, that confronts him. No words are exchanged as the combatants draw their lightsabers and begin to advance. Now then, given everything we have examined, everything we have extrapolated, and every conclusion we have come to, would Jinn be able to replicate his apprentice's actions and achieve victory over the cyborg? No, definitely not. Physically, Jinn may be in great shape for a man of his years, but he's not exactly a four-armed, clawed-hand cyborg alien who could move fast enough to blur out of existence and withstand shots from a laser cannon. As far as martial arts training goes, Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber technique simply isn't suited for a duel with a fighter like Grievous. His personalized style may make him much less predictable than many of the Jedi Grievous has encountered, But if the general can analyze and respond to Mace Windu's Vapad after a single exchange, he's not going to be thrown off by Jinn's strength-oriented Ataru for any substantial period of time. Furthermore, if the Maverick's defenses could be surgically dissected by TPM Darth Maul's aggressive Juya style, then General Grievous's randomized, quad-bladed, hey let's see what happens when I plug all 7 forms into a random number generator attack sequences would overload it no question. On a tactical level, Qui-Gon's inclinations to take an offensive stance and assume strategies on the fly make him especially vulnerable to Grievous, since his methodology is quite literally built around taking advantage of overzealous offensives and baiting adversaries into unwinnable situations. Combative force abilities is an area where Jinn has an automatic edge over Grievous, since, he has them, but his aptitude in this area doesn't go far enough to compensate for his other shortcomings. His skills with physical augmentation are matched by the general's cybernetic enhancements. Mind tricks would be useless against such a strong-willed individual, and while Qui-Gon could definitely off-balance General Grievous with telekinesis, his focus on utility skills, coupled with his extreme reverence for the Force, makes the likelihood of him simply crushing the General's chest somewhere between unlikely and not at all. At the end of the day, Qui-Gon Jinn's inability to overcome General Grievous mirrors his inability to overcome TPM Darth Maul, as he would be pitted against an opponent whose skill set allows him to negate his strengths while simultaneously exploiting his weaknesses. This isn't to say that Jinn couldn't defeat someone of comparable skill to Grievous. It's just that his unconventional skill set ultimately stacks the odds in his favor. For example, Qui-Gon would have a distinct advantage against lower-end council masters like Adi Gallia, Evan Peel, and Yaddle, since their reliance on conventional lightsaber sequences and rote response tactics is exactly the kind of strategy he worked to circumvent. At the end of the day, Qui-Gon Jinn is one of those no-middle-ground combatants who is either guaranteed to dominate a confrontation or be dominated just as quickly. Against unprepared and conventional fighters, he is an unpredictable force of nature that cannot be stopped. But against those with an established game plan who can deal with what he brings to the table, he can get into trouble very quickly. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this latest installment of the How Powerful Was series. Please leave suggestions for future character explorations in the comments section below, and I'll see you guys later.